How important are EPC certificates and what can it tell you about your home? Well, let's find out. Hello, I'm Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert, and welcome to the latest episode of Heal Your Home. Heal Your Home is a podcast designed to help you and your family feel safer within your home environment and make sure that you have a better energy efficiency, lower running costs for your home, and most importantly, your home is right for you. Coming up in this episode, we're going to be discussing EPC certificates and their accuracy and what they may be able to tell you, whether you're a tenant or a landlord or a homeowner. As well as that, I'm going to be having an interview and a discussion with the project management director at Smart Estate Agents regarding residential tenant and landlord top tips. I'll also be sharing another tenant top tip and answering a listener email. But first, let's look at EPCs.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
Within this episode of Heal Your Home, we're going to be looking at EPC certificates, what they actually are, what they mean, and issues and benefits of them, so you can fully understand them when either purchasing a new property, looking to improve your property, or looking for a new rental property. So EPCs are energy performance certificates, and every property that is on the market, whether that's rented or for sale, is required to have one. Now, there are very small exemptions, such as if the property is listed, but for most cases, an EPC is required. Now, an energy performance certificate is a standardised process and assessment where certain things are graded within a property, and then out pops almost a generic type rating and an EPC rating, which is from an A all the way down to a G. An A is the best you can get, which means it's in theory the most energy efficient type property, and G is the least. So when you're looking at it from a practical perspective, what does that mean? Well, it means that your property, the higher the rating, so the closer to A, the more chance you're going to have of being able to heat your property comfortably without having huge energy bills. And again, all theory, it's never guaranteed, it's not a one size fits all, but you're going to have less chance of things like black spot mold occurring, condensation issues, and variations within winter months, summer months. This is not always the case, and there's a lot of things that EPCs do not factor in. As I say, these are generic types of reports, but they are still, they do still hold a place and a value within the industry. The issue we have with them mainly is the very fact that they are generic, so they will not take into account tailored or varied variations to buildings, such as if there's a multitude of different construction types, for example, or there's a lot of assumptions being made, such as in roof voids, which is a very typical one, where you will end up with an assumed adequate insulation within the roof void, but no one's gone and checked, so actually you're basing these on assumptions that may not even occur. So whenever an EPC certificate states it's assumed, it means they have no idea. They're just expecting that to be the case. So it's always good to go and check yourself. The minimum within a roof void should be 300 millimeters thick in insulation and consistent and consecutive throughout the roof without blocking off any soffit vents that may then cause additional issues such as condensation build-up and mold growth, which is definitely not something you want. Now, energy performance certificates also play a vital role within the rental market, where there is now minimum energy efficiency standards, and properties that are an F or a G are no longer legally allowed to be let, and then this is then going to be only getting tighter and tighter, so closer to A as possible for the UK market. Now, it's in the best interest of landlords to get ahead of the curve to make sure that they're jumping on any grant schemes that may be available, and also for tenants looking at properties, making sure that you're going into a property with a pretty decent EPC rating, because otherwise all you're going to be doing is paying huge amounts of bills, and then you're already on the back foot with your landlord trying to communicate and negotiate a new deal with them to actually kind of go forward and put these improvements in place. So how can EPC certificates be made better? Well, Energy performance certificates, as stated within this episode of Heal Your Home, are standardised. They are made from generic theory-based data. There's a database that gets plugged in. If it's double glazing, for example, a figure pops out and U-value performance, etc., and it gives it a rating. Now, this is not appropriate for all properties, and also energy performance certificate qualified surveyors not always are the best at acknowledging or knowing or understanding building pathology and how things may well be able to communicate with each other, and also how things react with each other. So for example, if you have a timber frame section of a building and a stone frame building, or a stone section of a building, how these two can then relate to each other. You can't then just standardize everything and insulate everything or clad everything. It doesn't work. So it's a great starting point, and an EPC certificate is a great starting point, but then you need to then take that to a competent contractor or a surveyor that understands the building and the makeup of the construction to be able to tell you what the feasibility of that is. So to be able to go through those lists and say, actually, this really isn't going to work for this property. It may actually make the property worse. So for example, putting cavity infill insulation into cavity walls. Now, this is a big one that we're seeing at the moment within England, and EPC assessors are screaming about it. They're saying, this is something we need to get into buildings, and also a lot of grants, they will not allow grants to take place unless you agree that part of that grant is going to give you cavity infill insulation. Now, on paper, yes, it does do what it says on the tin, as in it will increase the thermal efficiency of the property. Absolutely. However, what they don't take into account is everything else that comes around it. A cavity is supposed to be there, and it's supposed to allow for that wall construction to ventilate. So if there are any cracks or breaches in the outside wall, it's not going to go in the inside. However, when you fill that up and you fill the cavity up with insulation, if that then happens, it's just going to go straight into your property. Then you're going to look at worst case scenarios. You're going to have big patches of rising damp everywhere, water ingress, because it's going to retain and draw that moisture into the inner side of your wall. And also, as well as that, more seriously, any property typically pre-1981 has inadequate or less adequate than modern day standards of wall ties. So the galvanization of them, they're not as adequate to deal with water content. So they will start to rust. And then as they start rusting, they expand. And as they expand, this is when cavity wall tie failure can happen. So not only is it a bit of a big issue with water ingress, but also it can cause structural issues with your property as well, and especially in Cornwall or coastal environments, which typically is 50 miles from the coast, which pretty much covers the whole of Cornwall and a huge array of the southwest and England as well. So if you're inland and you're keeping your external facade or the outside of your building in a well-maintained condition, or if you've got cladding and you keep on top of that, yes, in theory the cavity insulation will be a benefit, but you have to be on top of it, and you have to know what the good and the bad, and also the potential ramifications such as structural issues as well. So the big question as well is, can an EPC rating affect the value of a property? Well, yes. Now, it's been seen that more and more these days, sustainability and energy efficiency is becoming the forefront of a lot of homeowners and a lot of tenants' minds, and also a priority within their own life, especially when they're running a building and a home, because it's becoming more aware that obviously living crisis, things are going up, things are becoming more expensive. You do not then want additional bills trying to heat your home to make sure it's safe. So this is a big reason. Plus, obviously, sustainability is an amazing factor within the built environment. We want to be as sustainable as possible. So this EPC rating directly relates and reflects and represents that. So for people selling their home, you've got an energy performance certificate, you're shouting about it being great. The higher it is, the better it is. So actually, you do tend to find there is a bigger audience that's more attracted to a property. If you have two equal properties on the same location, but one has a better EPC than the other, most of the cases, what data is suggesting is people will go to the one with a better EPC, because also it shows that it's potentially more maintained. It's been, whether it's retrofit, whether it's been constructed from new, but it has been done with more thought. In theory, that may or may not be the case, but this is what people tend to lean towards now, especially if you're a tenant as well. Your funds can be tight, and this is something which is particularly important, and the awareness of EPC certificates and their importance, not just a figure on a piece of paper, but their actual importance in real life application, what they mean, is becoming a lot more aware, and is also becoming something which is integrating with a lot of other areas. So I think there's talks and trials on financial influence and gains for EPC improvements for landlords, as well as a lot of controversy about their obviously the accuracy of EPCs and whether or not we can tie them in with incentives, with say mortgage rates or grant incentives and things like this. So the EPC has to become more accurate before any real changes or implications and integration of EPCs can actually be used within the general built environment. But this is going way and beyond what this episode is about. EPC certificates are important, and they do create a more desirable property, whether that's rental or on the market for sale. If you're a landlord and you're looking for long-term tenants, obviously within England at the moment, especially within the southwest, there is a shortfall of available properties to let, especially for families, and therefore you're always going to get a high demand. However, to put your property and you and your asset and your portfolio above the rest, focus on the EPC, focus on how to improve that, but obviously economically it is still a financial investment, but make sure that you're utilising the finances and grants available. The main thing to take away from this episode of Heal Your Home is if you're a tenant, you do have a voice and you are protected by UK legislation. If you feel you are in a property that is too cold, is damp, is not up to habitable, acceptable standards, you do have the right to make a formal complaint to your landlord, and any landlord should have a formal complaints procedure. And there are legislation out there within England and also various areas of citizens advice, us for example, other organisations that are here to support you and your family. So if you feel you don't understand or are able to take these steps yourself, there are multiple organisations out there. Reach out to one of them, us included. But also, you do have a legal right, and all landlords should have a complaints procedure in place, and you will therefore have protection over yourself and your home.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
I'm excited to have gone on site with Rob Graves, the Project Management Director at Smart Estate Agents in Exeter. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. It's Jason, the Home Health Expert here, and I'm here with
Rob Graves from Smart Estate Agent.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining me today. So if you could just, in a really quick nutshell, introduce yourself and what you do.
Certainly. So I'm the director here of Smart Estate Agent, and I'm responsible for the property management in Exeter and down in Falmouth and Penryn.
Fantastic. So it's pretty much the damp end of the country then, right?
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
So, I mean, as part of what I do, I see a lot of buildings that are damp, or, that can be mistaken as damp.
Yep.
And you can have black spot mold and all sorts of things come up. And obviously there's this age-old kind of battle between tenants and landlords and who's responsible. Is there any top tips for tenants when they're moving in to kind of look at how they could try and mitigate and prevent these things from happening?
Yeah, so every tenant that moves in, we give them a fact sheet about condensation and mould. Okay. And I guess our top tips are around ventilation is the key one, probably more important than heat. Yes. So making sure that the property is well ventilated. And then the other probably thing is, if it appears, if you deal with it straight away, it's typically really manageable.
Yeah.
It's when you let it get hold
Yeah.
that we start to get issues with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, and what are from your experience, what are your kind of top issues, I suppose, that come through from tenants regarding dampness?
I guess the big issue is who's to blame. Is it the landlord? Is it the tenant who's responsible? And the way I tend to look at that is if it's ingression of water, typically it's the landlord's responsibility. If it's living standards or living conditions, it becomes the tenant's responsibility. It's trying to demonstrate that to either party, which is the problem.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So when you go, I'm assuming you do interim inspections on houses. Do you often, because when I go into these places and they complain to me, it's very much, simple things like clothes airing on radiators, things like that. Well, what are your common things that you see that sort of behavioural wise that could kind of cause these issues?
So yeah, again, a lot of things is about drying clothes inside because there's a lot of damp. They don't realise if it's not in your clothes anymore, it needs to go somewhere. So that's a big one, especially this time of year. It's starting to turn a bit colder. Certainly it's pretty wet out there at the moment, and people are drying clothes inside. I get the important thing is to open windows to get that ventilation going. Obviously, warm air holds more water than cold air, so the temperature is also quite important and what you're doing about that. I think sometimes people make the mistakes of closing the doors and windows, putting the heating on, and don't realise that actually they need to cause some ventilation. That water's all going to go somewhere when it cools back down again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of concern as well is, as you say, quite rightly, it's getting colder as well. And, when you've got sort of the living crisis, things are more expensive. People may not want to be opening windows and they kind of close trickle vents and things like that. So it's, do you think that it might be, I know it's a bit more expensive for landlords, but do you think it might be worth them considering putting in mechanical airflow systems or things that might help?
Yeah, the pressurised systems that come down from the loft, they're fantastic.
They are,
They are, the number of times we put those in and they just solve it, and I do tend to agree with that for the sake of what is typically around £700 to £1,000 investment, and I use the word investment for the landlord. I think it makes a huge difference, those sort of things. I think there's other things as well. We get the extractor fans. Staying on top of extractor fans. The number of times I go and do an inspection and they're covered in dust and dirt, and that affects the efficiency of the extractor fans. So stay on top of your extractor fans, keep them clean. And if you're a landlord and they ring you up and say you need to fix your extractor fan, fix it.
Well, absolutely, It
would be the real call.
No, fantastic. So when you're looking at landlords and in gaining an instruction for a new property, is that maybe a conversation you have with them about kind of how to, sort of top tips on how to maintain those properties?
I guess I tell you where it's easy with new landlords. But when you've got old school landlords who have been doing it for a long time, they'll tend to think they know best. But that's our role to explain to landlords what the benefit is to them of doing these things. And I think that terminology is important, getting them to understand that it's an investment in their property.
Because it is. It's obviously it's still a business for them, isn't it?
It is.
So, and do you find from your experience, if you've got, say, a well-maintained or high-energy efficiency property, you tend to get more sort of rental income or more attractiveness from tenants?
So there's been a shift over since the energy crisis started, probably about 18 months ago, where people now look at EPCs. And people are looking at that sort of thing. Tenants certainly are. And, it would have been lovely to have a nice quaint old cottage, 2-3 years ago. But now people are looking for modern, efficient homes, certainly from a tenant's point of view.
Okay. And I'm going to put you on the spot now. So when you're obviously EPCs, the expectation from legislation is increasing over the years, and there's obviously this, I suppose, not confirmed yet, potential increase to C for EPCs. What do you think?
So you've missed the announcement yesterday from Rich.
Did I?
They've wiped it.
Have they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I should do more reading, obviously.
Rich came to our rescue for landlords,
Yeah.
and they've wiped the requirement to be at a C by 2025 for new tenancies,
Right.
and 2028 for all tenancies it was.
Okay.
But there was real issues behind how they actually get that done with the amount of stock in the UK that is
Yeah.
older property.
Yeah.
So they've taken it off. And again, I've been looking at that and saying over again the last 18 months, for every landlord, look, when you're doing work,
Yeah.
take into account the EPC, because you'll need to get it to a C.
Yeah.
So if we're doing major works, we might as well get it to a C now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've made a few landlords, unfortunately, spend out a bit of money. But again, I still think it's appropriate. It's an investment in their property.
Yeah.
Energy prices are becoming more and more important.
You're still future-proofing it for them, aren't you?
Yeah, so I still think, although it's no longer a legal requirement, let's say yesterday that went, but it's still probably relatively important
Yeah.
for as a property investment, and also to maintain the demand for your property.
Yeah, fantastic.
But again, that's an interesting thing that's going on at the moment, because demand for rental property
Yeah.
is huge. You'll have
Yeah.
read in the news recently, it's rising at its
Oh, yeah,
fastest rate ever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
a lot of that is because landlords are leaving the market as the government puts more and more legislation on them, more and more tax on them. And unfortunately, it's the end user, who is the tenant, who ends up suffering because of that.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And I think with tenants as well, their voice, I suppose, because there's such high demand now, maybe for the lack of stock as well. It's kind of where do they feel, if they're kind of raising queries or concerns about a property, such as sort of poor management. Yep. Where is that line where the landlord could just turn around and go, well, I'll just see you later, here's your notice, and I'll just put somebody else in there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tenant is relatively well protected, I believe. And it is about being fair and educating it. But, if you raise maintenance issues, then retaliatory Section 21s have long since that been banned. Yeah, okay. So if you can prove that the Section 21 or serving a tenant with notice is retaliatory, they can't do it.
Right, okay, yeah.
So that already exists in place. Actually, the process is, if you go to your landlord and he doesn't do it, the process is environmental health. Yeah. And they're set up to deal with it. Okay. They'll typically come and inspect within 5 days of being given notice of an issue within a property. And we're, again, likewise, we welcome that. Yeah. And what they'll do is they'll give us, or give the landlord, an improvement order. Okay. And that gives you a set period of time to make the changes that are required. Yeah. We often get this debate, is the property habitable or not? Yeah. And that comes, the damp one. Well, if it's the tenant creating the mould and condensation, there was lots of fuss about the mould a couple of years ago with the death of this poor child. Yeah. Horrific story. So there's been lots of talk about that and who's actually responsible. But there is, the process is there in place. Yeah. I'm just not sure all the tenants are aware of it. No. And I think as property managers, we need to not be fearful of it and actually encourage it. Yeah. We don't want to manage poor quality properties. Exactly. Yeah. We want them to be habitable. We want the people to enjoy it. Now, within that, there is a different standard of the properties. That will always exist. And in the same way, people live in different ways. Yeah. It isn't for me to dictate to people how they live, and as long as they give that property back to the landlord in the same state they got it, actually they can live there how they like. It's their prerogative. It's their. A great line I use with all my landlords and my tenants, it's the tenant's home, but it's the landlord's property. Yeah. And we want to encourage that. We want tenants to treat it like their home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you so much for today.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
See how much you cut out of all of that, but yeah, brilliant.
I don't think we'll cut any out. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
And now, a listener question for Heal Your Home.
We have a listener question in from Padstow today. It's great that you guys up in Padstow are listening to this podcast already. This episode actually relates quite heavily towards places like Padstow, with some beautiful old stone buildings right next to very exposed locations. So thank you, Laura. That's great that you've written in. I understand from your email you're looking for a way to approach your landlord about looking at energy improvements to your property. Single glazing in a grade 2 listed can be very difficult. solid stone walls and maybe some thinner areas of brick as well. So there's a lot going on, and it's not easy. It's not an easy fix. You can't have a standardized fix for these sorts of things, but there is always a solution, and you do have a right, you have a voice to be able to approach your landlord. But what I would suggest is writing in a formal letter to be able to then take to your landlord and say, look, this is what our EPC rating is, this is our bills, this is how much it's costing to ensure we have a healthy living temperature in our home. We really can't live like this. It's not sustainable. Please, can you help? It may even be, I don't know what the situation is with you and your landlord. They may be very supportive. They may not be, but it's always worth maybe looking at the grant schemes available out there for them, pointing them in the right direction. Also looking at various benefits to them also, because yes, it's a benefit for you and your family. You're going to have immediate well-being enhancement. It's going to reduce your financial costs to your property, but also for a landlord's perspective, it's going to protect the future of that property. EPC minimum standards is going up, and it will continue to go up to help with climate change and sustainability and reducing carbon footprints. So it's only in their best interest to actually put these action plans in place before they're forced upon them. That's what I would suggest, and you are protected and you have the right to be able to approach your landlord for these things. There is so many different areas that can be upgraded depending on the individual property, such as upgraded roof insulation, upgraded heating systems, mechanical ventilation systems which can then balance out the temperature within a home, potentially conservation, double glazing, insulated dry lining internally to a property, underfloor zoned heating. There is so many different elements that could potentially be viable to help with your problems. I know that's quite generic answer within this podcast, but if there's anything else specifically we can help with, you know we're here for you, and good luck with approaching your landlord.
Jason's tenant top tip.
Today's tenant top tip: how can we resolve landlord disputes easily? This comes down very much to understanding as a tenant what your rights are, but also what your responsibilities are. Now, there are maintenance issues that landlords are responsible for, but you as a tenant are also responsible to make sure that your living conditions are as free of mold, condensation, and you report any repair requirements and any defects to your landlord or estate agent as quickly as possible. This will really help you and your family have as stressless time within this transition and communication with your landlord, especially at the end of a tenancy. Make sure that you're leaving windows open, you're well ventilating shower rooms, bathrooms, kitchens, to prevent condensation build-up, which inevitably can lead to black spot mold, which can then cause all sorts of issues within your home. And also any general disrepairs, making sure shampoos are carpeted at the end of tenancies can also really help. And also just make sure that the property is redecorated regularly.
Heal your home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. It really does mean a lot to me and my team. Check out the website at homehealthexpert.co.uk for more information, to check out the services that we can help with for you and your family and improve your home's health, and also for the top tip guides that we have available for you. You can submit listener questions through our website and also by emailing our team at info@homehealthexpert.co.uk or by searching for Home Health Expert on Instagram and Facebook. We will try our absolute best to get round to your questions and help your family out to improve your home's health. Don't forget to subscribe to Heal Your Home wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube if you're watching along. Thanks again for listening. It really does mean a lot. We could not do this without you, and in actual fact it would be completely pointless. So please send in your questions, and I look forward to you joining me in the next episode of Heal Your Home. Your health, your future, it all starts here.